Logically, what's more likely? An increasing number of academics simply got bored of being an atheist. Then, against a 99% certainty and for no apparent reason, not only all independently decided to adopt a similar new worldview, but also one so pathetic it is exposed by a level of science an 8-year-old child can grasp.
About 8 or 9, I was always into science and nature. Yeah, it doesn't make sense, does it? I'm being very diplomatic here, but if we accept that no one knows that there's a God or not, right, we might be wrong. We're 99% sure.
So, Ricky claims his atheism holds a 99% certitude to God's non-existence, and the 1% level of uncertainty only offered to be diplomatic, itself equivalent of holding a belief in Santa.
Of course, it's just like Santa.
So certain, in fact, of his position, he demands there shouldn't even be a word to describe it.
I mean, there shouldn't even be a word for atheism. It shouldn't exist. Shouldn't need it.
Now, Ricky claims he always follows the evidence, but there is clearly no empirical evidence that supports this level of certainty, as confirmed by his friend Dawkins when he was challenged over the same kind of conviction.
I mean, I put it as something like, 99% against or something.
Well, how do you know it's 99%
I
against?
don't, and it's quite far from 50%.
How do you know?
I don't know. I mean,
Therefore, how can they be so sure? And if wrong, how much damage are they actually doing?
And in terms of changing minds, both of you are enormously influential.
Both Dawkins and Ricky will be influencing thousands of people to hold a false certitude, which then encourages people to stop even looking for any alternative truth that may exist. And it gets even worse when that false conviction promotes an arrogant disrespect towards opposing views through statements like this.
I mean, their best argument, ironically, is that it's just faith.
pretty pathetic, really, isn't it?
Well, it is pathetic, but they mustn't ever engage in logic.
So, no pulling any punches here then, with Ricky and Dawkins categorising theistic belief as pathetic. And as for the inability to engage in logic, well, sorry to disappoint you, Ricky, but that's exactly what I now intend to do. You see, essentially Ricky's saying, I'm right and your worldview's pathetic. Now let's switch gears and listen to a cognitive psychologist discussing a book title he states perfectly describes what is known as the influences of confirmation bias.
So a few days ago I was sitting around a bookstore looking at books, and I saw one with a lovely title. It was called I'm Right and You're an Idiot.
Sound familiar? I'm right and you're an idiot. I'm right and your worldview's pathetic. Cognitive psychologist Ray Nickerson contends confirmation bias is one of the most robust and well-documented findings in the cognitive sciences. So no pseudoscience to be had here then. Confirmation bias, simply put, is our unconscious tendency to accept information that aligns with our existing beliefs, found here, while dismissing or completely ignoring anything that challenges them, represented here. And none of us are immune. Not atheists, not theists, not spiritualists, agnostics, no one. Not even Ricky. Moreover, Ricky confirms when his atheism started.
No, I've been an atheist since I was about 8 or 9.
So he was 8 or 9, indicating the effects of unconscious bias could be at its strongest. And just to reaffirm, none of us are immune. Research confirms even experts and scholars remain completely unaware of their own severe professional biases and will persist dogmatically under a false certitude. Therefore, unless Ricky is to deny decades of research and scientific evidence, or attempts to claim immunity where no immunity exists, cognitive science alone seems to render his unsupported demands of a 99% certitude an impossible claim. Furthermore, the Stanford study confirms how cognitive bias can lead to a delusional mindset of, I think it, therefore it's true. And isn't it under such a mindset that you would expect to find assumptions being presented as knowledge? Assumptions such as...
So none of us know, so we're all agnostic, right?
No, not right. Wrong. How does he know nobody knows exactly? Through near-death experiences, meditation, prayer and other spiritual practices, millions, including one staunch atheist, have reported direct experiences of a divine presence. Yes, Ricky's perfectly within his rights to dismiss them all as delusion, but unless he can prove it, or at least refer to a single scientific study or a piece of research, then it remains pure speculation presented as knowledge. He continues.
And some of us choose to therefore not believe in a God, because we don't know, atheist.
Yeah.
And some of us choose to believe in a God despite having no evidence. That's the only difference.
Despite having no evidence. Again, as we will see, another purely speculative claim presented as fact, which conveniently then supports his next appeals to a false knowledge.
They've got to go faith, 100%.
But as we will see, that's pure and utter fiction, thus allowing his assessment.
Well, it is pathetic.
This then, conveniently again, leaving near undeniability of his own atheist position as the only rational alternative. However, we will soon be uncovering the unspoken elephant in the room, an elephant that seems to falsify most of his claims of knowledge. But if that's true, how did he come to such a level of certitude?
I'm going to always follow the evidence, whatever that is.
And he genuinely believes that, because it's sort of true. And I will even confirm by following the evidence, it really does lead to a 99% certainty. Why? Simple. Because when we follow the evidence, as we're about to, it seems abundantly clear. The evidence Ricky follows consists exclusively of what's found here and relies on ignoring or dismissing what's found here. Back to Professor Wettering.
It means that most of us, most of the time, are actively supporting our own prejudices and seldom calling them into question.
And that's exactly what we're doing. We're calling Ricky's claim to knowledge into question. But remember, it's that implied undeniability we're scrutinising here, not atheism in and of itself, which is a perfectly reasonable position to hold. So with that, back to where we started.
They mustn't ever engage in logic.
But wouldn't logic force us to question whether the millions of adults who maintain a belief in some form of metaphysical intelligence itself challenge his already proven fictional certitude? Well, Ricky counters this with,
I wouldn't be smug with that sort of thing because maybe they've never thought about it or
Well, I would agree
or
with
they
that.
don't understand.
I think that
now understand, we're talking about a self-certified critical thinker here,
Critical thinking
on an intellectual pursuit
is an intellectual pursuit.
Yeah.
that could uncover.
It would be the greatest scientific discovery ever.
Well, wouldn't critical thinking simply ask, if you were genuinely on an intellectual pursuit into human truth rather than reaffirming a childhood belief, would you really be attempting to dismiss millions of people that may just hold the answer to the greatest scientific discovery ever on a maybe?
Maybe they've never thought about it.
And as for they don't understand, wouldn't that same critical thinking also demand that we inquire as to the millions of highly intelligent individuals who also believe in a God? Ricky seems to think he addresses this with,
A lot of religious people are intelligent, but they've been got at an early age.
so indoctrination. But does that really hold together? What if we now add to the equation the millions of highly educated and many eminent scientists who still believe in some form of metaphysical being? That then presents the rather irrational scenario in which we have millions of scientists holding a worldview so pathetic it is exposed by a level of science an 8-year-old child can grasp.
About 8 or 9, I was always into science and nature. I thought, yeah, it doesn't make sense, does it?
You decide for yourselves, what's the more rational option? What's the more likely to have created such a nonsensical scenario? Objective thinking or blind unconscious bias? Indoctrination or no indoctrination? Surely it would also then be logical to ask, could Ricky offer another example within the scientific community where there exists an almost 100% certainty, but millions of scientists maintain an opposing view that holds the intellectual equivalent of a belief in Santa? Or would a more plausible explanation be found referring back to the scientifically confirmed mindset of, I think it, therefore it's true? And all that before we even get started with this fella sitting over here. An observational reality I've never heard Ricky or his friends Dawkins ever discuss. That reality being the growing number of former materialistic scientists, many who were brought up in an atheistic household and who, rather than turning a blind eye or casually dismissing any phenomenon that challenged their worldview, choose to investigate and research to discover the evidence no longer supports an atheistic perspective. For example, biochemist Dr. Saigati.
God does not exist. There's no such thing as God. It's impossible. It could not be a God. That's what I was brought up to believe. I came from a militantly atheistic family, going back 3 generations.
Brought up in a militant third-generation atheistic family, so no spoon-fed indoctrination to be had here then. And here's Dr. Rosalind Pickard. This is how she once regarded theists.
Views at the time were that Christians, and actually all religions I was pretty antagonistic toward, were people who really didn't know their science. I really didn't think they were that smart.
Antagonistic towards the religious and categorising theists as people who really don't know their science. Sound familiar?
It's ignorance.
Well, it is pathetic.
Believe silly things.
Even though that's incredibly stupid, we think, actually, it shows what the problem is when people try and understand it. They can't grasp the scale of it.
So it appears Dr. Pickard clearly once stood in Ricky's shoes, but now holds a theistic worldview.
Learned about that, I changed my viewpoint gradually from an atheist to an agnostic to a theist.
And so there's no misunderstanding. Let me introduce her properly. Scientist, inventor, entrepreneur, author, engineer, MIT professor, received one of the highest professional honours regarding an engineer, recognised as a fellow of the ACM for contributions for individual health and well-being, elected to the National Academy of Inventors, awarded the International Lombardi Prize, which carries a €1 million award, which she then donated to alleviate suffering. So is Ricky seriously going to claim how, unlike him at the tender age of 8, this highly accomplished woman
Can't grasp the scale of it.
and that's why she now holds a worldview he categorises?
It's ignorance.
Well, it is pathetic.
Believe silly things.
Then we have the book Coming to Faith through Dawkins, a collection of accounts from highly intelligent and successful individuals who once fell under the spell of the book The God Delusion. Then, fueled by their own critical thinking skills, each became delusioned by the arguments and conclusions of Dawkins, causing them to look deeper and with more objectivity into religiosity. So how are they going to be dismissed with?
Maybe they've never thought about it, or
Well, I would agree with
they
that.
don't understand.
I think that
The truth is, an ever-increasing number of individuals and scientists from all around the globe clearly falsify not only Ricky's claim certitude, but also the false claims to knowledge it all relies on. They can't be dismissed with indoctrination or a failure to understand, and their position is not 100% faith-based. Consequently, they and their evidence must all remain over here, never to be discussed. Ever wondered why Ricky seems to hold interviews with scientists who reinforce his current worldview? Wonder no more. A classic symptom of confirmation bias. So, back to that exclusive logic that Ricky demands the theist can't engage in. Logically, what's more likely? An increasing number of academics simply got bored of being an atheist, then against a 99% certainty and for no apparent reason, not only all independently decided to adopt a similar new worldview, but also one so pathetic it holds the intellectual equivalent of a belief in childish mythical characters like Santa. Or alternatively, these scholars, as confirmed by their extensive publications through scientific investigation and objective research, conclude a reasonable case for a metaphysical reality can be made. And through the scientifically proven influences of cognitive bias, Ricky, protecting a childhood embedded belief, is simply blinded to the glaringly obvious real-world reality of their existence and the evidence their conversion was based on. Evidence that had to be persuasive enough to overcome their own embedded atheistic biases and entrenched materialistic beliefs. So there's your logic. And it's abundantly clear what it supports. A claimed 99% certitude is quite simply pure and utter fantasy. But understand, all this isn't exclusive to Ricky, but seems indicative of the new atheist position as a whole. Within hours of my first clip being posted on Facebook, the militant new atheist army instantly arrived to attack, to then basically prove the point I'm making. Similar to Ricky, I got hit with no evidence. It's all down to childhood indoctrination and images showing that knowledge equals atheism. Obviously, I just responded with a shorter version of what we've just been through and simply inquired as to these once atheistic scientists. Several times I repeated the same question and several times it was ignored. Do they honestly believe such avoidance will go unnoticed? How can you honestly have a rational discussion with people who are in a state of delusional certitude brought on by refusing to acknowledge observational realities? And this, ladies and gentlemen, it seems to be the position of the new atheist. Not a rational rejection as to the claim of God based on a healthy scepticism, but some militant certitude which seems to be embedded in delusion. And yet here's Dawkins.
And it's quite far from 50%.
How do you know?
I don't know.
What did that Stanford research state? Cognitive bias can develop into a delusional mindset of, I think it, therefore it's true.
We don't need God to be good, and even if we did, we haven't got him.
Quite right.
And this is all just minutes before we were assured.
There's lots we don't know, but we don't jump to conclusions.
Really, does it really reconcile with what we've just witnessed? But with all that said and done, let's take a breath and understand none of this makes Ricky or others evil or anything. He's simply human, like the rest of us, with the same flaws and weaknesses, though in possession of a rare talent. However, it seems abundantly clear Mr. Gervais made his mind up the whole God thing was a lie at the age of 8 or 9, convinced himself it was the truth, then reinforced his treasured possession for over 5 decades. And if true, every conclusion he now comes to will be seen through the distorted lens of the delusional mindset. He knows there's no metaphysical reality. And that's the motive behind this and coming videos. A final statement from Ricky?
It's ignorance that annoys me more than anything.
We're all ignorant to 99.99% of what there is to know. So why on earth would you allow ignorance to annoy you more than anything? Not very wise words then. Personally, I agree with Professor Stephen Hawkins when he asserted the greatest enemy of knowledge is not ignorance, but the illusion of knowledge. And that's exactly what cognitive bias seems to offer, the illusion of knowledge and the ability to create a false understanding and with it delusions of grandeur. Unfortunately, however, if developed in individuals like Ricky and Richard Dawkins, their fame gives them the power to influence hundreds of thousands of people to stop even looking for any truths that lay outside of their false certitude. Possibly why George Bernard Shaw taught, false knowledge is more dangerous than ignorance. And could it be that the truth we all seek simply sits patiently waiting on the other side of that false knowledge? Anyway, that's it for now. Thank you for watching, and if you agree with its content, please share this report. Give the like button a tap, pop a comment in below, and most of all, subscribe to let the algorithm know we exist. So until the next time, stay well, stay safe, and most important of all, hold your beliefs lightly and remain open. Bye-bye.